Welcome, everybody, to what promises to be a lively discussion on a difficult topic, preserving affordability, gentrification without displacement. Frankly, something that has not been high on the CNU agenda for a long time. The Charter of New Urbanism calls for, quote, neighborhoods that are diverse in use and population. This reflects the larger issue of the excitement of living in a traditional city, the coming together of people of different interests, identities, cultures, and income levels. Of course, in a large city, the term is relative. For example, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, CNU members, architects, and planners would provide the cultural diversity and amusement to the multimillionaires of Fifth Avenue and Park Avenue. Even in Manhattan, to many, has become too gentrified, unaffordable to the middle class, diluted and bland compared to the gritty stew of the past. One must now move to Brooklyn, where even Williamsburg now is too hip. Artists have pushed the frontiers to Bushwick to live on the edge in a mixed-use neighborhood. But what happens to the poor who lived in these neighborhoods? Is it possible to revitalize a community without displacing the very people who have lived there until now? Is it possible to reach a state of equilibrium in a community? How can new urbanist communities create a mix of incomes and diversity to live up to the Charter principles? Is there hope for Windsor, the polo-playing population, or are they doomed to live in a white-bread country club for the rest of their days? This panel will explore the history and ways that diversity and gentrification can coexist side by side. Our first speaker will be Alexander von Hoffman from Harvard. He's a senior fellow at the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University. He previously was an associate professor of urban planning and design at the GSD and also a fellow at the Taubman Center for Local Government. He's the author of a number of books, including House by House, Block by Block, The Rebirth of America's Urban Neighborhoods, which I recently read, and it's remarkable how it outlined in detail many of the same things that were on the front page of the New York Times and in Atlantic magazine just this past month, and he wrote the book about 8 years ago. So, Alex, please.
Thank you, Alex, and remind me to have you introduce me again. I enjoyed that. Welcome, everybody. I'm not sure the design problem has been solved in this room. I see a sort of suburban sprawl element, but I'm glad to be here. I'm a historian. Historically, our cities grew with mixed use, mixed income neighborhoods. Then we zoned that idea away and created the current dilemma of lack of low-cost homes in suburbs, resort areas, and in our cities, especially the booming ones. So my first question and point, I'll just make a few points today, is how do we operate? Oh, it's like that. Okay.
Oh.
Great. It's sort of cinematic. All right, good. Well, one more. There we go. What about old urbanism? You talk about new urbanism. I'm here to tell you about old urbanism, where mixed use and mixed income went hand in hand. And here is my favorite Boston neighborhood of Jamaica Plain around 1890. This is a bird's eye view. And you can see the pattern, the mixed-use pattern of development in American cities before all the rules and regulations were put in place. Let me just, no, it looks like a big blur, but here's a railroad. Down here, you see big spaces. That's where the estates were. Here are factories along the railroad. It's just a block away. In here are a mix of housing, middle class, a variety of houses. Along this railroad are breweries and other factories. Very proud of the Rudolf Hafenreffer brewery over here, which was the seat of, perhaps you've had Samuel Adams beer. That's where they started. They revived the old brewery to start making beer there. And then there's the pond and so on. All of these things were in walking distance from one another. The mansion, the cottage, The factory, the stores, all of that were built and developed simultaneously within a short distance of one another, because in that period, no one saw anything wrong with it. They were just used to that. In fact, the wealthy people who owned factories often liked to live within a distance so they could see how it was going. So it'll take me a while to get to the hang of this. All right, so, whoa, come back. All right, this is good enough. This is a close-up, a plan of that same area, and it just basically makes my point. There's the railroad, there's the Stony Brook, and if you can see, I don't know if you can make out in the back, but those little lots and their little houses on the atlas, those are workers' cottages, very inexpensive. Here, as it says very clearly, are the estates. This is a middle-class and commercial area. And I'm generalizing because there are exceptions within that. So that's the pattern we had, and I can even show you what it looked like. Come back. There. Okay, so this is a part of Jamaica Plain. This, for those of you from Boston, is known as Mission Hill. It's actually Parker Hill. This is the railroad. You can see the gates there. This is Heath Street. Here is a brewery. There are factories. There's an estate up there. The Lowell Estate is on top of the hill, and they have kept it green. I heard there was a dispute between landscapers and new urbanist architects as to how they should proceed and could they work together. Here it is together. There's the landscape and the arboretum up there. Here's a 3-decker and inexpensive housing. Again, all within walking distance. All right, so that's the pattern. Now, I'm very amused by this. So zoning comes in. I'm going to jump ahead. And to show you the pattern, when zoning first came in built areas, the zones described what was on the ground in those areas. So when they got to Jamaica Plain, it was like this crazy quilt of little spots. I mean, it's sort of spot zoning from the start. As they tried to say, well, this is single family, this is 3-family, this is business, and you can see they just almost went nuts trying to identify, because it's a pattern that existed before heterogeneously. All right, I'll take you through these kind of quickly. These are just commercial areas, and you have the south end of Boston. This is Harvard Square way back when. And you'll see there are shops, and upstairs there are offices and apartments. This is Upham's Corner in Dorchester. Again, these glorious big, they call them commercial blocks, but they have residences upstairs. They're making good use of that, and so there's mixed use right from the start. And this is Somerville. Same deal. You can see it all over eastern seaboard cities, and for that matter, all of the cities that were built up in the United States by the turn of the century. And then we get, and everybody in the room knows about this, we get zoning, right? It comes from Germany, and ironically was one of its inspirations was to protect areas for working class housing development on the outskirts of German cities. Well, that entered the American atmosphere and was instantly turned into a tool for social and economic dominance by the hegemonic forces in American society. So we get, and I will take you a little detour to the planned communities, which are of an inspiration to many new urbanist planners today. They go back to the early 20th century planned communities, industrial housing, and other planned towns. But zoning was in the air, and this compulsion to sort everything out, it becomes part and parcel of the thinking. And you can see here in Morgan Park in Minnesota, the developed area below, small, tight, up above, big landscape. You can guess which occupational groups were going to live where. They actually sort these things out by occupation, the skilled workers, and I won't take you through the scale of the houses, but each level on the economic ladder gets a house appropriate to their status. Here we have Bertram Goodhue's plan for Tyrone, New Mexico. Very nice plan, very interesting. But now we're segregated by occupation and ethnicity. The Mexican workers got 2-room houses in this new development. They were coming from rural areas, so they were glad to get 2-room houses, but there was nothing compared to, and they called them the American homes, the homes for the American workers. And finally, the end result, or maybe the point of the whole thing, is to get something like this, where you have segregation by race. This is Chickasaw, Alabama in 1918, but it's the same impulse. All right, there we go. So, marching on. All right, zoning as it comes to suburbs. This is not going to fit here, but this is an early zoning plan, 1927, of a suburban community in the Boston area called Weston, and you can see what looks like an empty map. There are little dots here, and everything else is white. The white part is the zone for single-family residences. So basically, when they got zoning, they said, all right, it's all single-family except for these little spots. 20 years later, come back. They add some more colored spots. All that means is that they made the white area 40,000 square foot minimum lots. These other blobs are slightly less, 30,000 and 20,000 and so on. 20 years later, 1957, they did it again, and they increased the minimum lot to 60,000 square feet. All right. So what were they trying to do? They explicitly banned 3-deckers and multifamily apartment buildings of all sorts. And so here's a picture of a nearby town in which they allowed that, the industrial city of Waltham. And they did so explicitly, they talk about this, because they didn't want the immigrants, the working class people in those areas. So it was explicit. What's interesting about that is even though they banned that, if you look over the years, wherever it's had a chance, and now we go up to the 1960s, suburban area of Acton, Massachusetts, rental apartment complexes with modest rents appear because there's demand for them. They find a place. They hide, as this one, near the railroad tracks, or sometimes if there's a moment when the zoning is relaxed, right on the main road. They're all over. They're here too. I don't have contemporary ones, but it's amazing how they find the places. They're like clover. They'll spread out if they're not stomped on and suppressed. Here they are, guarded by lions. I think that was nice. So it's at this point that I can say that these towns have bans on multifamily structures. The zoning puts this in place and makes it possible. So here is my Ronald Reagan moment. He told Gorbachev to tear down the wall. I'm here to say tear down the wall of zoning, and we can create the new world. All right, I'll take you quickly through. In Massachusetts, we have a program to get around the zoning called 40B. I won't describe it except to say that a developer can override or be allowed to override local zoning restrictions if the town does not meet its quota of affordable housing and the project includes affordable units. So here I'll just quickly give you, back in Weston, this ultra luxurious development, 18 units, 18 homes, 6 for low income. It took them 3 years to develop this, and the people who did it on their own land next to their own house. So it's can be done, but it's arduous, especially if the neighbors are wealthy and opposed. But look what happens even if you introduce a little bit of new life into the community. There's Weston with an ice cream truck. Who would have known? All right, I will wrap up very quickly, I hope. Most of the projects are like this one that's flying by. In Wellesley, they look like this, and they combine market rate and affordable units, and most of them are put in some way isolated from the rest of the community. There's no outlet there. So that's one of the design issues that I'm sure people in the room could struggle with. All right, I'll leave you with one last project. We'll come back to the city, harking back to that age of the mixed use and mixed income. This is Washington, D.C., just a possible approach to this problem besides getting rid of the zoning. This was formerly the site of a public housing project. This is Ellen Wilson Homes in Washington, D.C. It's a 134-unit cooperative, which is mixed income. The government gave the subsidies to construct it in the first place, but there's cross-subsidy, that is the market rate, members of the cooperative, and also there are a few for-sale units pay. They're the ones who subsidize the low-income units. And I can give you the breakdown on that, but I find it, and you'll see that they made an interesting design choice in that they did not follow the same kind of building pattern. They tried to mimic the organic development that you find in Washington, D.C. of its row houses. So those are just a couple of suggestions, but the rest of the panel has even better ideas, so I'm going to pass it on to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Our next speaker would be Jackie Grimshaw, who's a legend in CNU. She's a board member and was originally former board member and vice chair. She's presently the vice president of policy at the Center of Neighborhood Technology, and she's fought for social justice in Chicago. She was a close advisor to the late Mayor Harold Washington, and she was also a close neighbor of President Obama when he lived in Chicago until he moved to a large suburban villa in the middle of Washington, D.C. Jackie.
So thank you very much, Alex. I don't know why we're having so much technical difficulty today. It seems like it must be in the water or something like that. Hey, we even got it up here, so how did that happen? That's pretty cool. Go back to the beginning. All right. So Cobus is my new best friend, I tell you. So as Alex says, I'm from the Center for Neighborhood Technology in Chicago, and we do a lot of research around urban issues. In fact, our mission is to create new tools to help and improve sustainable living for low and moderate income people in urban neighborhoods. So we kind of use Chicago as one of our research guinea pigs, you know, figuring out if we can make it in Chicago, we can make it anywhere. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our latest research that came about, and I do policy at CNT. And so this is kind of like a policy framework that, you know, policies drive what can happen on the ground, what happens in implementation, like Alex was talking about in terms of zoning. I mean, those are policies that dictate what happens in communities. So what I want to talk a little bit about is the research. We looked at 3 areas: transit-oriented development, a new construct that we created called cargo-oriented development, which is essentially transit-oriented development but around freight rail or goods movement, intermodal facilities, and so forth. And I don't have enough time to talk about that today, so that's why I crossed it out. And the third thing is about employment-oriented transit And we did this research. It was generated because our MPO, our Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization, had just completed their long-range transportation plan. And it was really a policy plan, and it's called Go to 2040. And so the policies are great. It's the best plan that has come out of our region. Back when ICE first passed, one of the things I did was organize a group to make the Metropolitan Planning Organization listen to constituents, listen to the people in communities. So we've come a long way with that organization. And so what we said is that policies are not enough. You have to have an implementation strategy, and that you have to make sure that you're targeting where you're doing your investment, because otherwise you're just spreading around the investment resources in the community like peanut butter, and that doesn't do you very much good. So our plan was to use some of the tools that we have developed over the years as a way of trying to identify what are the priority areas in the city. I'm doing okay here, Cobus. You know what's happening is that this was an animation, so you don't see the animation. Sorry about that. And our going from one place to the other, you miss it. But one of the things that I really wanted to stress with this slide is that, our economic conditions have changed. We've been through this economic recession. Incomes have become stagnant. We have higher unemployment than we've had in many, many years. And, of course, our historic fuel prices. And so the result of all of that is that we now have a kind of like a reverse interest. We're getting away from the sprawling developments, the developments and car-dependent developments, and looking again, as Alex says, back into the old urbanism, the new urbanism that we all advocate. And by doing that, we have increased location efficiency, and location efficiency is another one of those terms that CNT kind of created about 10 years ago when we were looking to see what is the relationship between housing and transportation, and we've gone on since then to do a lot of work on that, I'm sure, as you know. So what do I mean by location efficiency? It's really looking at the legacy development patterns like we just saw from Alex. Is respectful of the scarce land that we have and the energy that's required for that for servicing development. It is about appreciation of the interaction between the community and the assets in those communities, particularly transit assets, and it's kind of like going back to the future. And that's what we're all about with new urbanism. So CNT's this latest research, we tried to highlight how we can get back to the future through transit-oriented development, cargo-oriented development, and employment-oriented transit. But one of the things that we found is that the Chicago region did not take advantage of these assets that we have with our transit system as other communities across the country. That if you look at what we did in Chicago around transit in the last 10 years, that we added a net 9,576 households near transit over that period. And San Francisco Bay Area, on the other hand, grew at approximately the same rate in terms of people, but added an additional 40,000 people around transit. So the densification around transit was much greater in San Francisco than in Chicago. And even a region that we found like Denver, which has less extensive transit system than Chicago, and about a third as many households added more than 10,000 residents around their transit station. So what we discovered in doing this research is that we have missed a great opportunity. Now, as transit-oriented development can have as great as impact on neighborhood affordability as well as the whole atmosphere of the community in terms of tax base improvement and so forth. And in the Chicago region, this is this animation is working. How about that? Okay. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. So in the Chicago region, we have, as I said, we failed to take full advantage of our transit investment, and and we fed into that whole sprawl development pattern rather than densifying people where jobs are, where services are, where stores are, etc. So the region has a vast supply of vacant and underperforming properties, as you see up here, and we see that as opportunities for redevelopment and redevelopment. So our current research identifies through various tools that we've created. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at our transit-oriented or TOD database. We have another tool that we call TOD Optimizer, which we use for now a lot of analysis. Another one called Cargo-Oriented Development Optimizers, where we have a variety of criteria that we put into that black box and with algorithms and so forth, and out spits a lot of information. So using those tools, we have identified some priority areas that really could take advantage of new development. They're ripe for TOD, they're ripe for affordable housing, and for infill development. Oh man, I got to talk faster. Because of employment dispersal away from low and moderate income workers, they have to travel greater distances and greater distances for employment, thus costing them financially, and they have to rely on automobiles for transportation. And so what this screen shows, or the slide shows, is that these little, come on. Make this work. Oh, these green boxes, it doesn't show up as well as it does on the computer, but these boxes are where the high employment areas are, and these dotted lines are a transit system, and as you can see that there's a disconnect between where the jobs are and where the transit is. And so the other thing this slide shows is that these darkest, orangest areas are where the low income population is. And so again, is that how do these people who are in need of employment get out here to where the jobs are? And our transit system doesn't provide that kind of opportunity. Excuse me, that kind of opportunity. But what transit-oriented development can do is deliver some of the lowest income households opportunities to have affordable, what we should be working for, I should say, for these lowest income residents to have opportunities to have housing near their jobs. So what we did was that we looked at the 343 station areas that are close to near employment centers and the most pressing needs for affordable housing. And one of the things that we discovered is that as the development patterns decrease the household transportation costs, the region becomes a more affordable place to live. And to achieve that, we need to have more affordable housing where people can have access to I'm out of time, access to those jobs. So let me show you one of the things that we also discovered is that in terms of employment-oriented transit, we found that the 4 of the 5 largest transportation centers in the Chicago region are areas without access by transit. And so, why did we do all this? Is that we wanted to have our policy folks, our decision makers in the region, look at these areas and to prioritize these areas as places where the money should be invested, and that we shouldn't take the money and divide it equally, which is what we've done in our region, divide it equally all over the place, because in these areas that are right for transit-oriented development are the areas where low-income people low-income people live and need to have access to transit. On the other hand, we have, as I said, a lot of areas in the region that have lots of jobs, but also no affordable housing. So we also identified the places where affordable housing need to be built so that people can have an easier access to jobs and increase their household income and thereby increase the income for the region and the vitality of the Chicago metropolitan areas. And I went a little bit over my time, but whew, I did it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Our next speaker is Roseanne Haggerty. Roseanne is the president of Community Solutions, which is a new organization that develops and demonstrates more effective and lower-cost ways to improve the lives of vulnerable people and neighborhoods by unlocking the resources within communities. Some of their signature projects are the Brownsville Partnership, 100,000 Homes campaign, and first supportive housing for vets in New Orleans and D.C. She was also the founder of Common Ground, that's built many supportive housing developments for formerly homeless people in the New York area. Roseanne?
I put up hers.
Oh.
Sorry about that. Go back.
Can we switch this?
No, that's all right. We can go back and find it.
Which one is it? I don't know. Roseanne, which one is it?
Mixed use.
Thank you. Well, the idea, as both Alex and Alexander referenced, that communities need to be well-conceived socially as well as economically and aesthetically is not a new one. The CNU charter gestures to that, and a project that has been the inspiration for my sequential organizations has been Hampstead Garden Suburb, which you're probably all familiar with. But I think it's a very good touch point for this conversation, in that despite being very in sync with CNU values, what struck us, my colleagues and me, in really identifying closely with this project was that from the very beginning, this development designed in housing for low-wage workers, for seniors, for orphans, and I think it's no accident that the developer and the sponsor of this project, which is now incorporated into London, is a very posh neighborhood, was the same philanthropist who founded with her husband Toynbee Hall, which was the inspiration for Hull House. And so out of the experience of working way downstream on dealing with people in great poverty in East London and the squalor of housing conditions there, the fact that this same woman, Henrietta Barnett, thought to create an upstream solution, which is a community that, to quote Alex, really reached for a kind of social equilibrium, well-designed, economically and socially mixed environment, because I think ultimately we can all sort of nod at the conception that if our communities were designed this way and managed this way and really held to a standard of equilibrium, we actually wouldn't end up with problems of concentrated poverty and the kinds of wasted lives that where we all struggle to find a better solution in order to address. And so our work, first at Common Ground and Community Solutions, is very much about how you work toward an upstream solution and use design, housing policy, and a real intentional bias toward including people of various social circumstances and economic means in the design of communities. And I think it's probably, if it's not CNU, I'm not sure which organization in the country will kind of take up this notion that we have to move beyond mere kind of aesthetic integration and different housing typologies to a real commitment to social inclusion if we're going to get out of this situation we're in our country of just growing division. What I'm going to show you a few examples of are projects that our organizations have worked on that kind of show a different way as possible. This project here, the Prince George Hotel, is on 28th Street in Manhattan. It's a restored historic landmark, but it's also an example of permanent supportive housing. This is a type of building that is very aggressive and including people who are very excluded. Long-term street homeless. 50% of the units are dedicated to people who literally move off the streets of the 5 boroughs of New York City, and 50% of the units are for lower-income working people earning up to 80% of median here. The units, this is actually from a different Common Ground building, but pretty representative of the type of units that are included in supportive housing. Modest studio apartments with private baths and kitchenettes, rented for about 30% of a person's income. Formerly homeless tenants have generally a rent subsidy from a variety of sources, whether it's Section 8 or housing benefits for persons living with HIV/AIDS or the mentally ill in New York State. There's a rent subsidy program to assist. But the idea that people with these profound challenges in their past can become successful tenants in an environment that is well-designed, well-managed, and is connected to the supports people need to rebuild their lives, I think demonstrates that perhaps we underestimate the power of the places we create and our imagination in creating the right kind of support systems under people. In addition to housing individuals who have had multiple challenges, it's really an enormous investment in the social infrastructure and the cultural infrastructure of our cities to create affordable housing for artists and workers in the hospitality and other industries. And the fact that these groups that seemingly would not have anything in common, in fact, can come together around their informed community in a well-designed and well-managed environment, I think, it kind of gives pause to the idea that we can't really find these ways to mix our approaches to housing. One of the important features, though, is real intentionality about community building and about the quality of management in these places. Unlike, I think, an approach to management which is kind of like, often overlooked as a key feature in what makes good places, there really has to be someone in charge and someone who's really mindful about integrating the quality of the operations of the building, the appropriateness of services, who's sort of functioning, if you will, as the mayor of the building and making sure people get what they need and problems do not go unaddressed. The fact that you can integrate in these types of buildings the kinds of activities that help people put their lives back on track, whether it's a financial literacy class or learning how to prepare a healthy meal and work again, or learning how to grow your own food in a rooftop garden. I mean, I think that what is represented by the kinds of experimentation that happens in these buildings is a very different way of thinking about housing, and including making green environments and educating people in how to contribute to those types of developments. I want to show you the trajectory we've been on, and I think it's a very hopeful one. Here's a project that is in downtown Brooklyn. You see the site marked out there, and then the blue area indicates a building that we built just a few years ago called Schermerhorn House in the midst of essentially a luxury development. The developers of these luxury row houses donated the property to us to build a 217-unit building. Polshek Partners were the architects, now Enniad. And you have housing really cheek by jowl, serving some of the wealthiest people in Brooklyn and some of the poorest, people who literally moved off the street and out of the subway tunnels of downtown Brooklyn. And the fact that the building's well-designed, well-managed, and is a good neighbor helps to really give weight to the fact that when the Furman Center at NYU studied supportive housing in New York, they found that blocks that included supportive housing actually saw property values rise at a 4% higher rate than blocks that did not. So I think the Schermerhorn House project in particular helps challenge the idea that these are kind of negative presences in neighborhoods. In fact, I think illustrates people's willingness and even desire to live in more radically inclusive ways, which is why we have organizationally actually started a new organization to look at these upstream challenges, and maybe inspired by the Hampstead Garden Suburb example. We took a look a few years ago at where the problems that lead to homelessness begin in our cities, and they're typically the poorest neighborhoods of our cities and country. And I think Jackie would concur that a lot of these neighborhoods that you're focused on, like this, where you see this heat map there, those are the neighborhoods in Brooklyn where the highest rates of prison enrollments and incarceration numbers are. you're going to find that these are the neighborhoods that you need to focus on if you're ever going to get to different downstream outcomes for people. And so we went to one of the brightest red spots there, right in East Brooklyn, a neighborhood called Brownsville. And what we found in those census tracts was this: largest concentration of public housing left in the country. It's actually a blessing as well as a curse to this neighborhood, because, to the theme of our talk, there is the promise in neighborhoods like this, if you can improve public housing and use some of the unused development rights around it, to create healthier, mixed-income, sustainable communities without displacement, as long as these buildings remain in public ownership. This is the kind of housing you'll find there, and the New York City Housing Authority has done a pretty heroic job of maintaining the housing well enough. It needs retrofitting, it needs massive investment, but it doesn't need to be demolished. I think you need to rethink the site plan, though. Here's what we have now, just these vast super blocks. Thanks to Alex's help, we've actually reimagined what they could look like if you reopened laneways and created new development sites. Without demolishing a thing or displacing a soul, you could create from 700 to 1,000 new units of housing, community facilities, better open space. Here's how some of that development could fit on those blocks. Here's what you might actually see in Brownsville someday. Retail back on the streets that would connect and activate the sidewalks. You probably all saw this photograph in the New York Times a couple months ago about recladding public housing towers, a way of creating great efficiencies for NYCHA, which has a $600 million utility bill every year, and also potentially creating work in building retrofits. And then lastly, to really tie it back together to how you get from where we are to where you might be, you need to connect the players in communities who are usually working earnestly but not in integrated ways. And so we've connected about 30 different city agencies, not-for-profits, and community organizations to work collectively toward a different vision for Brownsville. And I think I'll just end on the note that you have to design your communities in every conceivable way, including socially and economically as well as aesthetically. Thank you.
Thank you, Roseanne. Our next speaker is Jamie Ross, who is with the 1,000 Friends of Florida. She's the Affordable Housing Director, and she promotes affordable housing by working with local governments and with nonprofit and for-profit developers through the state's growth management laws. She's also director of the Florida Community Land Trust Institute, as well as president of the Florida Housing Coalition. And she's long advocated for affordable housing and inclusionary zoning within CNU. Jamie?
Thank you. I don't know why I'm actually bringing notes up here, because we have such great mood lighting here. It's really nap time for everybody, isn't it? So, and thank you, Alex. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about. And I have been talking for a while about this issue about inclusionary zoning as it relates to new urbanism. And so I want to start, before I go any farther, by saying that I love new urbanism. I'm a huge fan of new urbanism. I work for a smart growth organization. So before I say all the negative things I'm going to say, I just want you to know that, okay? It's just that we've had a lot of experience in Florida with new urbanism, going back, as you saw the preview there of the seaside slide, and in fact we may have more than 55 now, but at the time of the housing boom we were up to 55. And as I have said before, we are the poster child for the fact that well-intentioned new urbanism, and what we've heard is absolutely true, affordable housing or mix of uses and incomes is definitely a part of the new urbanism philosophy. Well-intentioned as it is, it has been an abysmal failure, absolutely abysmal. So we start off with Seaside. You're all familiar with that. The employee cottages, homes for millionaires. It wasn't because Robert Davis wanted that to happen. It was that nobody knew, when Seaside was first developed, that it would take off the way it did, that it would be so desirable. So why is it that these well-intentioned developments They have close together. The housing we have high density and a mix of types, but there's no affordability because they're beautiful, because everybody loves them. They're very desirable. People just flock to the new urbanism communities, and the market raises the price. It's just natural. It's supply and demand, and it's desirable, and so it goes up. And as far as being the poster child, I just put a few slides together. This is particularly offensive one, Baldwin Park, because this new urbanism community sits on the site of the former naval base. And those of you, and I don't know how many in this room other than Roseanne, are affordable housing experts, but there's actually a priority for the homeless. When you reuse, we have some experts in that. So that's why this one is particularly offensive, because no, the homeless didn't get anything in Baldwin Park. Now, Hope 6 developments, that's a federal housing program. They're all done in the new urbanism. They're the only affordable, only new urbanism developments that we have that actually have affordable housing, because they're the sites of public housing. They had to. It's a requirement. But even with Hope 6 developments, you didn't. You still had displacement, because right before the Hope 6 program was passed, the one-for-one replacement law was ditched, which meant that really about a third of the people who formerly lived there ended up coming back. This is just another example. This is in Bradenton in Manatee County, Florida, another Hope 6. So that's what I'm saying, is that so you have new urbanism, you're creating new towns in many places. I mean, we have some huge new urbanism developments. So they have their own churches and schools and grocery stores and whatever, and they're not having any diversity. They're not having an income diversity. They're also not having a race diversity that we should be seeing, and that's the problem with it. So inclusionary, I don't know. Is there any affordable housing folks out here? Okay, great. So inclusionary is basically a requirement that when you're doing market rate housing, a certain percentage of that housing needs to be affordable. So it's a requirement. There are such things as voluntary inclusionary ordinances. They don't work. Well, they work for affordable housing developers, because then, if you're going to do affordable housing anyway, then you get nice little benefits and stuff by the voluntary ordinance, and so that's cool. But it's not going to work as far as having a person who wasn't going to be doing affordable housing build affordable housing if it's just a voluntary ordinance. So that's what I mean by inclusionary before we go on. Now, more examples. Celebration, Florida, that's right outside Orlando. That's a whole town. Celebration. Not any affordable housing. Oh, you guys seen City Place? Did you take the tour? Were you told there was nothing there before City Place was built? They really were poor people. They were homeless people who were there. It's enjoyable for us. This is, in fact, I stuck this slide in there because people say, oh, and Seaside, when we were planning this session, and Alex said, yes, but it's by the water, and what do you expect? Well, this is Southwood. It's in my town. I live in Tallahassee, Florida, because I'm a lobbyist, and so that's our capital. And nobody wants to live in Tallahassee. I mean, this is not like the go-to place, right? But we have this big new urbanism community called Southwood that was developed by the St. Joe Company. They used to do all the paper, lumber and stuff, and so we're not in that business now. So they're a huge developer in Florida, landowner, and so they realized, hey, that the best way to develop is in the new urbanism design. They've got a number of new urbanism communities now. They're on hold because we're not in a housing boom anymore, but that'll come back. But so in Southwood, they started off, oh yeah, we have all the ranges and we have the apartments, and those are affordable. But in about 3 years' time, those apartments were no longer affordable because it was desirable. And so the market raises the price. I mean, that's just natural. So why do I think that we should have inclusionary and a requirement? because that is the government's role. Okay, so the government is in charge of land use, right? The zoning that we've been talking about and so on. And the government is supposed to be acting in everything they do to protect and promote the public health, safety, and welfare, and to be good stewards of the land, right? And they have to have this balance of private property rights and the public interest. And when you rezone, you create value. So what inclusionary, so local government is creating value for the private sector. Well, the local government isn't in the business, or shouldn't be in the business, of just creating wealth for the private sector. They should be in the business of promoting public welfare. So if you're, same time that you're creating wealth by rezoning, whether it's to form-based zoning, smart code, or to rezone to a PUD, or the ability to be able to do this new urbanism development, they are creating wealth. They need at that time to have some land value recapture in the form of an inclusionary zoning ordinance to say you need to include a certain percentage of your units as affordable. And that way, they will give the new urbanism developer the ability to realize their goals in including a mixed income community. So I want to show you an example. I had funding from the Rockefeller Foundation some years ago where I went around the country to check out inclusionary zoning, community land trust stuff. And Davidson, North Carolina was really interesting to me. It's a little town that's 20 minutes north of Charlotte. Kind of a college community, desirable, and they were finding that, well, first of all, the city commission was tired of the cul-de-sac developments, you know, the traditional houses, single-family houses, cul-de-sac, and at the same time didn't like their town losing the traditional neighborhood design, and also didn't like the fact that they were losing all of their low-income black community because they couldn't afford to live there. So they said they put a moratorium on all building while they redid their code, and they came up with a code that has 50% open space requirement. So that's really high. I'll have to tell you guys. Okay. And they looked at what their city was right then, and they had a stock. They took an inventory of their affordable housing stock. It was 12%. So they pretty much set like a level of where they said we're not going to go below that 12%. And so that basically became an inclusionary zoning ordinance. And at the same time, they also were using long-term land leases with their nonprofit in the small town, so that the properties that were created with the 12% affordability could be deeded over to the nonprofit, who would manage those properties, as Roseanne was talking about, in good management. And this is really cool. I thought you'd like to see this. The bungalows in Davidson, North Carolina, really cool. They did a charrette. They did a lot of work with, you know, what kind of housing people wanted. And people wanted single-family houses to fit into the neighborhood, but they needed rental. And so they worked with an architect who designed. You don't happen to be in this room, do you? While I'm up here talking, because I know you've got a lot of architects here, right? The bungalows, which are triplexes, and so when you stand in front of them, it looks like a single-family house, but it's exactly the same in the front as it is in the back. So in the back, you can drive in the back. And so you've got a single-family house, it looks like, on the front, the exact same thing on the back, and then there's staircases that go up to the tops, and there's a third apartment on top. So they're adorable, and I mean, this is just, you know, the kind of wonderful architectural work that you got there. So you got 3 families, rental there. So gentrification without displacement, you've got to have long-term affordability, because even if it's affordable to the first buyer, it's not going to be affordable to the second. I recommend community land trusts as a great vehicle for doing that. It doesn't have to be. You can have deed restrictions that don't also use community land trusts. I think in the long term, it's there's much better chance of success if you have a community land trust. We actually had Abacoa, I think is the name of it, in Florida, that had a little inclusionary requirement, deed restrictions, and then they waived them. They took them off. You couldn't do that with a community land trust. And then, of course, and I think also Roseanne referred to this, you also have to have subsidies, because you're going to get to a certain level of affordability with your land use restrictions, but you're not going to get to the extremely low income. When you're talking about populations like Roseanne was talking about, you are going to need additional subsidy. And of course, we don't have time to get into all of that now, but that's a whole nother, you should go to Affordable Housing Conference and you learn about all the subsidies. I don't have time to talk about all of that. And I want to make the point that there's no I know I'm focusing on inclusionary. I'm kind of insanely focused on inclusionary. But there are also lots of other tools, and one that is really cool for new urbanism is accessory dwelling units. Like in the Southwood project that was built in Tallahassee, they had what they call carriage houses, which are basically like accessory dwelling units. But if you don't have recorded restrictions around that, they also will not be affordable housing. So I'll give you an example in Orlando, in downtown Orlando, which went through a big redevelopment design in the late 80s with Church Street Station and all this area, areas that had been homeless and then became gentrified. They had, what do you call them? Not like, well, they didn't call them accessory dwelling units.
Granny flats?
Yeah, they call it granny flats. Anyway, here's what happened. People started renting them out like bed and breakfasts. They started... It's kind of embarrassing, but I know that because some friends of mine had me over to their house, this really nice house in downtown Orlando, and they were so proud, and they were showing me their granny flat, which was a bed and breakfast. So I cursed, I didn't say anything, but I was thinking, oh my God. So, so the local government actually thought that they were creating an opportunity for affordable housing. They did. That's why they allowed it. That's why they permitted those garages to be used as dwelling units. I don't think they realized, again, that what they had created was so desirable and people were so into this new downtown Orlando that people would be able to use their garages as bed and breakfasts. So getting down to the extreme low income, we have one example of an inclusionary zoning program. So if you guys are interested in it, this is the one I want to refer you to in Montgomery County. It's like a granddaddy. They do get to the extremely low income because a third of their units are go to the Public Housing Authority, and I'm out of time, so I'm going to go right through there. But there is a national organization, the Innovative Housing Institute. I happen to be on their board. And since this audience is national, I want to bring them to your attention, because if you are interested in getting assistance, whether you're a local government or private sector or whatever, the Innovative Housing Institute is a wonderful resource for you to go to. They can do consulting. They can really help you from high level to the nitty gritty. And that's it. I thank you very much.
Thank you. We're running short on time, so I'll be very brief. No, this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I'll just show you a few images of some of the affordable housing that I've done. I became involved with CNU through work at Seaside over 20 years ago by designing 5 townhouses in Ruskin Place. But I saw there was very little social housing there, so I moved my interest to New York City, to the Nehemiah program, which was based in East New York, and this was the site on landfill that had been vacant for 50 years. And Nehemiah is a program of home ownership, and we've just completed our 300th townhouse, so it's an entire neighborhood Originally, these Nehemiah townhouses had front yard parking. They were not urban in any way. They were suburban, and I convinced the organization to move the houses forward to the street so they would have stoops and be modern interpretations of traditional townhouses. They're prefabricated, built in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and we have 10 different designs, 12 different colors. There are no fences anywhere. It's completely safe, just in a sense by being open to the street, with eyes on the street, as Jane Jacobs talks about. This has become a very safe community. And so we're starting another 80 townhouses. And then this is work I did for Common Ground, Roseanne's original organization. This was an empty lot in the South Bronx. I did a supportive housing project that is an urban infill block, so it's, again, completely repairs the street, repairs the torn fabric, and it's designed so that it looks like it's divided into 3 parts, with the individual units and the corner, the social services, so that where the building comes together as a common ground and becomes a landmark for the community. So this is the Brook in the South Bronx. And then finally, which Roseanne talked about, in Brownsville, we're working on a master plan to break down the super blocks of the old Robert Moses housing projects from 1948 through 1958, in which 28 blocks are now 3 large super blocks. Again, bringing the streets through, finding new sites to repair and re-urbanize the fabric, as well as to green the community. This is like smaller vignettes showing how we can find sites by bringing the streets through and greening the site using urban agriculture, sustainable strategies, and this is showing greenhouse of the arcades that would redefine the street, and urban greenhouses, which we saw very successfully used in Toronto at Regent's Park, and again the greening of the entire site. So I just want to make sure we have enough time for some questions, but just to summarize, it seems that it's desirable, as the Charter says, to have mixed-use communities of different income levels, and the question is, should it be legislated or laissez-faire? Is it the invisible hand of the market or regulated? Inclusionary requirements, or should it be left to the developer? So comments from the panel, and then we'll open it up.
You know my opinion.
Yes, Jamie, we know what to say. I think we know what we Roseanne?
Well, I think what we've seen, and Jackie's presentation and Jamie's presentations both went right to this, that you really have to be very intentional if you want to get a different outcome. What happens when we design well is that people gravitate to that, and those who don't have the economic means to compete will be pushed aside. I think we also have plenty of evidence that communities are strong and beneficial to all when we make room very deliberately for those who are going to need some assistance to live there. So I wish I could say there's evidence that this happens naturally, but there is none. I think if we want to have communities that work for everyone, we've got to be very specific about it and legislate that.
Ditto. Go ahead, Alex.
I couldn't agree more. In the world that we have today, you have to be, as you say, intentional, purposeful, willful, and make it happen. But I will point out that, for example, the population you've worked on for so long, we got rid of their homes. So this is part of suppressing, and I'm not a big everything's the market, but there used to be a lot of cheap places. In fact, the history of New York City is one of getting rid of low-rent apartments. First, often, sometimes out of the best of intentions, the initial tenement reformers, and sometimes out of the worst of intentions, the people who thought flop houses were something that had to be removed from the face of the earth and not worry about the people who live there. So I'd like to see a world in which we do what Jamie has said and what Roseanne has said, and also what Jackie said, that we start sensibly planning the development. But one way to do this, I really believe, is to open up development for lower, I don't want to say low income, for people who want to pay less rent. That happens already. We should study it and figure a way to increase that, because honestly, we are not going to be able to subsidize every low-income person's unit in America. So we need to do both things.
Actually, in New York, there's also a movement to open up different types of housing which are not allowed by zoning. There was a program called Making Room recently in which it was to change the zoning to reflect the way people live in New York. There are rules that not more than 3 unrelated people can live in an apartment and certainly not share kitchens or bathrooms. And the whole program by the Citizens Housing Council was to explore ways that there can be affordable housing by changing the actual physical makeup of the planning and zoning situation to reflect the way people are already living in a kind of underground economy. Any questions? Yes.
So there's no inclusionary requirement, you're saying? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
In New York City and New York State, there have been some activist leaders in the city and state housing agencies around creating incentives for very low-income tenants living in these buildings and attaching Section 8 and actually, but it's a series of very committed, intentional, kind of one-off solutions that are aimed at the very low income who are Section 8 eligible. No good global strategies that I've seen.
Yes.
Wow, I really appreciate that comment, and if I could, that is so important, and that's the transit and transit-oriented design is the other area that I'm always, yelling about, that you've got to have an inclusionary requirement around transit. Otherwise, it's exactly what you said happens. And we have examples of that here in Florida where we have had affordable housing built by transit, like in Miami-Dade, only because CDBG money was used to buy a parcel there. It would be so much better if we just had a greater connection, and we hear about that with Sustainable Communities Initiative and so on, about the breaking down of the silos with the HUD and with DOT and so on. And it would be so simple for, at the federal level, to use housing dollars, like, for instance, home and CDBG. Maybe not all of it, but a part of it. Say, look, if you want this pot of home dollars in your community, then you need to require affordability around transit. And then if you did that, then you would get it. But we are losing an enormous opportunity. And once it's gone, it's gone. Because, as you said, the land values are gone up. It's too late. Now is the time, when you're planning the transit, now is the time to get that in place, that there's going to be affordability. And it's to the benefit of transit, because when people are poor, they need to use the transit. They can give up their car. Their car is a luxury they couldn't afford. So you're going to have more ridership. So you're going to have more success in your transit. It's a win-win-win.
Yes.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that you have to do it in advance. If you wait until after the transit station is built or after the development is built, it really is too late. And so what Jamie says is absolutely true. You going to add to that, GB?
Well, we had this conversation in Boston, and unfortunately the council decided the only place to have affordable housing in Austin was next to transit. And what I argued with the city council was that affordability is a citywide problem, and ghettoizing transit stations and saying that's the only place to have affordable housing is actually a problem. And CNT has done a really good job of cost of travel, closer to transit, helps with affordability, but we need to have broader community-wide solutions, and then get mixed income communities and require mixed income communities at risk. I agree with inclusionary, but in building those tools. But I just think we have to be very careful to make this a community strategy, not just a targeted strategy.
Yeah, well, that's why we focus on employment-oriented transit, because, in those places, like Highland Park up in northern part of Cook County, which is a upper middle class and income community, they did put in place requirements for affordable housing. In fact, in the state of Illinois, you wouldn't know it, there is a requirement for affordable housing in places where they don't exist currently, but it's not enforced. So any policy that's not enforced is not worth a damn. But one of the things that Highland Park has been so successful, and exactly what Jamie has said, the overall value of the community, the property value of that community has increased. So finally, communities around them are starting to look at Highland Park, and Highland Park is actually allowing them to participate in some of their land trusts that they've put together and things of that sort, so that the other communities around Highland Park can want to have affordable housing and increase the overall value of the community, so that you're not ghettoizing, but you are including and dispersing people where they need to be, where they can get access, where they can have a higher quality of life, where they can reduce their transportation costs, and where the overall community can be uplifted. So anyway, go ahead.
One comment. We're seeing a backlash against DOT and Minneapolis for the very reason that you just mentioned in Austin, that there is so much attention from the planning department to focus on affordable housing related to our light rail lines, that other folks who live around those DOT areas push back, and so we create greater friction and really not a good situation for either.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question.
This is a question for Jackie, but here's a concept, affordable transportation that might go along with affordable housing. And I'm thinking of when we were growing up, there were jitneys. There were small rides, ways you could get around. And when I saw your map, I was struck by that. Yes, we'd love to have the infrastructure to have light rail everywhere. But in the meantime, could there be little short hops, modes of transportation to get working people to their jobs and so on? Is there any thought to that?
Yeah, well, those dots look very close together on the map, but you're talking about great distances. So the kind of jitney that existed in Chicago that Alex was talking about wouldn't really serve that need. But you know what we do have, and some of the communities are transportation management associations, where they run shuttles from the end of the transit line to where the employment centers are. And one of the most successful ones in the region is the Lake Cook Corridor, which is right on the border of Lake County and Cook County. And that's part of where, you know, the sprawl employment development happened over the years. So big, campuses like Baxter Labs and Abbott Laboratories and so forth are up there, and there's no way to get from here to there. So TMAs are one way of doing it, but jitneys aren't quite the answer. Yeah, but shuttle, yeah, right. Okay, all right. Yes, ma'am.
This has been really important. And the title, though, is like gentrification without displacement. And the emphasis has been seemingly to be on subsidizing living arrangements so that you allow people to stay in place by subsidizing housing. Are you familiar with any programs that have concerted attack to address the low income levels, you can actually raise income levels of the households through education, job training, and bringing in those increasing income so that it's also increasing their buying power themselves. You're increasing their wealth, not only subsidizing housing. So I'm very, very interested in that employment transit connection. And when you've seen programs that have been very effective in raising the competitiveness of people themselves so that they wind up building up.
Well, part of the cargo-oriented development strategy that I did not talk about is about that. So this is about taking a lot of that available land that resulted from displacement of manufacturing offshore, reinvesting around, and Arcade and Todd go together. So these are developments that have both rail transit and goods movement in the same community. And it's about reindustrializing and redeveloping on the housing side. And the community colleges in that area, there are 3 community colleges that are developing or have developed training programs, because one of the things that we know from the U.S. Department of Transportation and so forth is that the goods movement as an employment basis sector is only going to grow because of our reliance on development of manufacturing offshore. And so they have created a curriculum that they're training people in these industrial freight-related goods movement type jobs, so that people have an opportunity not only to have a better place to live, but also have the skills to participate in the employment of the future.
We're doing something quite similar in the Brownsville project, which is about economic development, capabilities building, improving the performance of the local schools. You really do have to work on both, as you point out, not just changing the physical environment, but making sure that there are pathways to a greater economic opportunity.
And I have a one-liner: trade unions, organizing for better wages.
Well, thank you very much, and it was a wonderful discussion, and we'll continue informally afterwards if you'd like. So.